Hello and welcome. My name's Michael Nelson, Customer Experience Manager with LexisNexis Regulatory Compliance. Today we're going to be exploring the functionality around our generative AI solution, Protégé. What you're looking at the screen at the moment is the Reg Compliance Plus landing page. To access Protégé, there are a couple of ways, but for today's purposes, we'll go onto the left-hand side of the screen and click on the Protégé logo. That will take us to the Protégé environment. There are 4 elements that allow you to surface the information that we provide in different ways. Ask a regulatory compliance question that looks at the obligations and the alerts and the underpinning legislation, and then responds to queries that you might have based on the prompts that you provide. You can summarize regulatory change by parsing through the alerts that we send. You can upload a document of your own to summarize it or to pose a question. And finally, you can use Protégé to generate a draft of something. Today, what we're going to do is walk through an example that gives you highlights of how these different functionalities can work and also work together. Rather than show you while it loads what's going on, I've prepared 4 instances, and so you can see how it all works. So the first thing I did was look at a document that was recently published by WorkSafe Victoria around psychosocial hazards in the workplace. I clicked on Upload to summarize or ask a question, and I asked Protégé to summarize the document, the Code of Conduct that WorkSafe Victoria issued, highlighting the key themes and relevant action points. Now, for those who are familiar with this document, it's about 112 pages, so it's a lot to go through. So I uploaded the document, posed the question, and this is the response that I got. So the document entitled Compliance Code Psychological Health provides practical guidance for employers and other duty holders under the Occ Health and Safety Act 2004. It pulls out the key themes and relevant actions, the purpose and scope of the code, definition of examples of psychosocial hazards, duties of employers, the risk management process, consultation requirements, managing reports of hazards and incidents, examples of risk controls, record keeping and monitoring, legal and compliance framework, gives you a sense of what's contained in the appendices, and then provides to us with a summary of relevant actions for employers. Now, the beauty of this is that it allows you, within 20-30 seconds, to grab an enormous document and pull the key elements out, which you can then copy, share through email or download and print. The idea is to look at what you need, pull out the key elements, and do it quickly and effectively. Now, what I did then was go to ask a regulatory compliance question. And so providing a prompt in the Protégé environment that sets out who I am, the environment in which I'm asking, both in terms of organization and jurisdiction, and the topic, allows me to craft a prompt that generates a really focused response. So as you can see on the screen, I asked, as a risk and compliance officer, a large charity operating in Victoria, what are our obligations with regards to managing psychosocial hazards in the workplace? And here is the answer that I got. As a risk and compliance officer for a large charity operating in Victoria, we have specific obligations under the Occ Health and Safety Act and the Psychological Health Regulations 2025. We're required to identify psychosocial hazards, minimize or eliminate risks, review and control measures, comply with the compliance code, which we just looked at before, consult with employees, make sure that we're keeping records and monitoring events. It sets out the penalties for compliance, and it also shows its workings. It looks at the obligations that have informed this particular response. Now, if this sets out the groundwork of what we need to do today, the next thing that I did was looked at summarizing regulatory change, because what this does is look at the alerts that we send out. And you can see here some examples of the kinds of prompts that you can employ. Now, what I did was ask, as a risk and compliance officer, as a large charity, what regulatory change in the psychosocial hazard space has occurred recently and what's coming up? So Recent upcoming regulatory changes in the psychosocial hazard space include the following. So here are the recent changes, of which most people who work in Victoria are aware. It looks at the key provisions, it looks at the compliance code and its key features, then looks at potentially upcoming changes. So this will continue to shape workplace compliance. Employers are expected to conduct gap analyses, update policies, and so on, implement comprehensive systems for identifying and managing hazards. And here are some immediate actions that we need to undertake, and some priority actions, and some ongoing actions as well. Now, you'll note that one of the points that it raises was update policies and procedures and training to align with the new psychological health requirements. That then gets us to draft. So I went to the generate draft function. And again, here are some examples of the kind of functionality that generate draft provides. What I did was go to this button and ask, as a risk and compliance officer, large charity in Victoria, please prepare a policy around the management of psychosocial hazards in the workplace. And here is what it came back with. You can see the steps that Generate Draft is working through. It starts with analyzing the query, then retrieves the contextual references, puts together a first draft, assesses that for completeness and accuracy, and then finally settles on a final draft, which we will have available to us in a moment. And here it is here. So what we have, courtesy of draft, in less than a couple of minutes, is a comprehensive first draft of your new psychosocial hazard in the workplace policy in Victoria. It allows you to, of course, personalize it, the organization, but it gives you a framework that I imagine would take considerably less time to fill in and complete than it would to start something like this from scratch. So it sets out the purpose of the policy, sets out the scope of the policy. It sets out what defined terms are, and importantly, gives you links to the underlying source material so you can see where this came from. Then it gets you the legislative framework, the principles and objectives, roles and responsibilities, identification and assessment of psychosocial hazards, control and risk mitigation, effectively everything that you need to complete an effective and up-to-date psychosocial hazard policy, appropriate and proportionate to your workplace. I hope that today's walkthrough of the Protégé generative AI solution has been useful and gives you an insight into how the different steps by themselves function, but also how you can incorporate each element of Protégé's functionality to understand, respond to, and circulate across the organization the information that you need in order to comply effectively and quickly. Thank you for your time.